The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University. This is EconVersations, a joint production of Troy Trojan Vision and the Manuel Johnson Center for Political Economy. Now, here's your host, Dr. Dan Sutter.
Hello and welcome to EconVersations. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Sutter of the Johnson Center for Political Economy at Troy University. Perhaps the greatest blessing we can have in life is parents who love us when we are children and raise us the right way. A part of good parenting is making us do things we don't want to do, like doing our homework and eating our vegetables. As adults, most of us recognize that although we might have complained mightily at the time, our parents' coercion on this regard made us better off. Should we similarly empower government to act like parents for us and make us do things that might make us better off in the long run, like, say, exercising or not using tobacco? The desirability of government paternalism has long been debated by political economists. How does paternalism work out in practice? Joining me on the show today is Dr. Todd Nesbit, a professor of economics with the Institute for the Study of Political Economy at Ball State University. Dr. Nesbitt earned a PhD in economics at West Virginia University and has taught previously at Penn State Erie, the College of Charleston, and Ohio State University. And he's also a scholar with the Manuel Center for Public Policy. Of relevance for our topic today is he's the editor of a book called For Your Own Good, published by the Mercatus Center, which examines the current evidence on the causes and consequences of government paternalism. Welcome to EconVersations, Todd.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, before we get started talking about paternalism, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got onto this topic for research.
Yeah, so honestly, back all the way dating back to my undergraduate years, studying simple excise taxes, I realized how really complex the effects really are. They seem very simple. It's a tax on, say, a gallon of gasoline or a pack of cigarettes, but the effects ends up being quite a bit more complex in terms of how it affects every consumer's daily lives. And so this project has really been 20-something years in the making overall. So I spent much of my academic career thus far studying excise taxes, but also for fun, I actually do some sports econ as well. Maybe that's another topic for another day. But
so I use the term paternalism, but as economists think about it, tell us a little bit of exactly what we mean by paternalism. I mean, we know what parents are, but tell us about what paternalism as a type of public policy would involve.
Yeah, so it's very much in the same regard that it may be better for us as human beings to not smoke, be healthier, maybe get more exercise, as you noted earlier, maybe not take as many risks with gambling and so forth. And so is there a way to use public policy to nudge, or maybe even another term would be shove, individuals into making better decisions about their long-term well-being? Because a lot of the behavioral econ research has truly indicated that we aren't always acting in our long-term best interest, and we tend to make some errors that are pretty systematic. And so maybe we do need that nudge.
And I mean, paternalism, there have been paternalistic arguments going back decades in political economy. And one thing to note is that, relative to other reasons people might want to ban certain things because they just oppose them, paternalism in some way offers at least the possibility that the person who's having something banned for them, the person being coerced, could actually be better off. And that's really important because, at least in theory, they might be consenting to these types of roles, right?
Yes, I mean, so you think about government in general, government is coercion, right? And we are opting into a government that we have here in the United States to at least to some degree. And so it is certainly better for us to be coerced, I would say, to pay taxes to build roads. Like, I think we're all better off having a system of roads. And so maybe it's also, in our best interest to tax individuals consuming cigarettes, such that the broader health of our nation is better, right? And I think that's the argument that's there. And certainly some people will respond by consuming fewer cigarettes, and maybe their health is going to be better. There's also some evidence that suggests maybe not everybody's better off.
Mm-hmm. And this is important, because you've alluded to the possibility that people make mistakes. So that there could actually be an issue in terms of people don't go. At one level, they want to go to the gym, but they don't go to the gym, and so there's almost like two selves here. One part of us at some level say like, yeah, I know I want to work out more, but then it's like, well, today's not a very good day because I've got other things to do, or the bed's really comfortable, so why don't I sleep in and skip that workout? And so there's this tension involved here that suggests that we're not making what would be our best decisions for us on our own. And that's sort of important as well, because economists generally model people as doing what's in their best interest. So for economists, this is a particularly thorny topic, isn't it?
It is. So if you think about like our traditional neoclassical economics, it's that we are all rational when we do act in our long-term best interest. But Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, Thaler just won the Nobel Prize last year for his work in behavioral econ, and that's really indicating, a lot of that research is indicating that we do make these systematic errors, and we will tend to really, we tend to make errors that hurt us in the long run that may actually be good right now, like it's staying in bed longer. Maybe also making, if we go to the casino, we tend to make a lot of systematic errors in regards to once we win, we tend to bet bigger, but also once we lose, we bet bigger. And so it's interesting just seeing some of the systematic errors that we tend to make. And maybe there's, again, some role for some paternalism to nudge us in a different direction.
You mentioned the term behavioral economics, and so if you would elaborate on this a little bit, because that's really sort of, I guess, revolutionized or really sort of changed some of the paternalism debate over the last maybe 20 years or so. So tell us a little about behavioral economics and its contribution here.
Yeah, so behavioral econ is really this merger between econ and psychology, right? And so it's looking at, it's kind of challenged this, oh, well, humans are always rational. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we're not always rational. And so we're looking at not how we would behave in our optimal way, but it's looking at how we actually behave. I think that's the best way that even Richard Thaler would try to describe it, is looking at how we actually behave and make these systematic errors. And again, it's more of a behavioral response that we do give in to some of our short-term biases in a large way. And so I would say that Thaler, in terms of paternalism, he would make a difference between, or a differentiation between a nudge and trying to encourage somebody to make a better decision, and then using coercion, right? And so a ban would certainly be coercion. I think a tax would be coercion. But in terms of making a nudge, if we want people to eat more healthy, placing the healthy foods at eye level and at the beginning of a buffet would tend to lead these individuals to consume more of the healthier foods rather than placing them at the end and the unhealthy foods at the beginning, where they pile up their plate or their tray with the unhealthy foods. And so that's more of a nudge. It can be avoided, but it makes it easier to behave in a more healthy way in this particular regard.
And the behavioral economics literature really is to my mind, the way I look at it is it's given us some concreteness in terms of what people's errors are. And it is like scientific in the sense that the psychologists were running these experiments and describing them, and like you could follow their directions and run that experiment on your own group of people and see if they again exhibited these same kinds of mistakes. And for some of the well-known biases or decision-making problems, these experiments have been replicated dozens and dozens of times with broadly pretty consistent results, right?
That's absolutely true. And so for a large respect, it's what behavioral econ is doing is taking the experiment that you would see almost in like a chemistry lab or a physics lab and trying to take it into economic, right? So we're trying to control for a lot of the other aspects that are in everyday life, and then putting it in a lab and seeing, okay, well, do people, if we change this one aspect, do people continue to make the same error time and time again? And that is something that we've seen is, on average, is replicable.
But one thing to note as well is that there is always a possibility that policymakers might be trying to impose their own preferences on people. There could be some differences. There could be people who simply like to gamble and they like to gamble, and other people look at that and say, well, you shouldn't gamble. So where we do say it's possible that people want to gamble less and might want to be nudged to gamble less or exercise more. It's also possible there could be some people trying to impose their preferences on others, right?
Yes, and so that's just where I think that it's really interesting to look at. Like in gambling, a lot of people that do encourage more taxes on gambling earnings, that is like making a stance that, okay, well, gambling is bad for the individual, but maybe those who are gamble see more value in actually just the experience of the entertainment of going and experiencing the thrill. And so I think it's a risk that we are experiencing to try to figure out, okay, well, are the people that are engaging these so-called riskier behaviors, is it that they don't understand and they're making errors, or is it that they actually just value that experience and that product more than other individuals?
So let's get into some of the tools of, paternalism, and as we start with a ban. So let's explain that. This prohibition of alcohol back in the 1920s and 30s, and then maybe the illegality of drugs today could be thought of as paternalistic policies, right?
Absolutely. And so you see with both alcohol and with drugs, it can create some dependency that we have seen, and it can lead individuals making a lot of really bad decisions, both short run and long run in those cases. And so we could try to go through some educational campaigns or try to convince people of their errors, or you could just try to ban it and force people to not consume. Now, ultimately, what we saw with Prohibition back in the 1920s was, it just went to the underground economy. People still consumed it, maybe not as much, but there was still a lot of consumption, and it was very more of a risky consumption. And if you look at modern day drugs, opium and cocaine, a lot of these other products were actually legal in the United States at one point. And once they become banned, they have become really more potent in a way to try to conceal it. And so, again, it's led to more risky behavior of those who continue to consume. And so it may be counteracting some of the original intent of this type of policy.
So a ban would be one thing, and you've also mentioned taxes. So let's talk about this. So if you wanted to use taxes as a way to discourage people from consuming something, how would that work?
Yeah, so Mike Lefebvre and I, one of my co-authors that's up at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, he and I have coined the term prohibition by price. And so it's prohibitive taxation is basically this. And so you continue to increase taxes to what we call prohibitive levels. And what we're seeing is that as you get the taxes higher, it'll cause prices to rise. People will consume less. We then have to figure out, okay, by how much less?
Okay.
Right? And that's going to depend on what type of product we're talking about. So cigarettes, consumers of cigarettes generally are not very responsive, so they have a pretty low elasticity. So they're not responsive to price changes that much. And so as the price goes up, there will be a slight reduction in consumption, but it's not by very much. And same thing with alcohol, same thing with gambling. All the so-called sin goods tend to be very inelastic, and so consumers aren't very responsive. And so really it's a really good revenue tool, raises a lot of revenue for the state or the federal government, but it's not a very good tool in most cases to truly discourage the activity. It does a little bit to margin, but again, it kind of falls flat.
Okay, so that's an important point to bring out, because you have these like sin taxes. Well, we also know that people generally don't like to pay taxes, and so I guess there's sort of like a question here of why are these taxes really being imposed? Is it for paternalistic reasons, or is it for revenue reasons, and simply like, well, who's going to defend smoking? And so if smokers have to pay taxes, and especially if you're a non-smoker, you say, oh, yeah, that's a good way to raise tax revenue for government. I don't smoke. I don't ever plan to smoke. And I won't have to pay that tax.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it honestly is it's good politics, I would say. It's not very good public policy, right? Mm-hmm. By any stretch. And it does actually, once you target a small group of individuals that can be, if we say, okay, well, they're raising the cost of healthcare, like because they're smoking and they're using the healthcare system more, and so they should pay more taxes. And so it's hard for those individuals to then mobilize and say, okay, well, we shouldn't be paying these taxes. And then they may not want to, but it's hard to mobilize politically to make that argument. And again, as you were noting, the non-smokers favor this because they don't have to, one, pay the tax, and number two, they are convinced of this alternative argument that, oh, well, they should be paying because they are driving up our cost for public health care. And so it becomes a very good political tool to actually discourage or to raise revenue. But notice that the one thing that I think is interesting is a politician will make two different comments in the same back-to-back. They'll say, oh, well, this is a good way to discourage a poor health consumption product, and so discourage consumption of cigarettes, but then also will raise a lot of tax revenue. Notice if you're raising a lot of tax revenue, you're not discouraging the activity. If you're discouraging the activity effectively, you're not going to be raising a lot of revenue. And so you can't accomplish both of these things at the same time.
Another element of the taxes on cigarettes and alcohol particularly is that these taxes are regressive. And that's a term that economists like you and I know, but if you could explain what a regressive tax is, and then the evidence on like, in effect, who's paying these taxes, and how that fits into bigger questions about the fairness of who should be paying for government.
Yeah, so this is certainly a major problem, the regressivity of most sin taxes. If you think about who the consumers typically are of gambling, of cigarettes, of alcohol, a much higher percentage of those who are poor consume those products than of those who are wealthy. And so it's not only that if I pay $100 in taxes, it's a smaller percentage of my income than if I was making $10,000 a year and paid $100 as tax. So I would be paying, as a wealthier individual, I'm paying a lower percentage. That makes it regressive in itself. But then on top of that, it's not like the poor and the wealthy are consuming the same amount. The poor are consuming a lot more of these, so therefore they're paying even higher taxes on top of it. So even in absolute dollars, they're paying more. Obviously, it's going to be a much higher percentage of their income, and so they're basically paying a much higher tax rate on the sin good than any of the wealthier individuals. And so again, this is not something that we normally see as a desirable tax system. Mm-hmm. Normally, at worst, we say, oh, we would like to be proportional, so everybody pays the same percentage of their income. A lot of folks would actually argue it should be progressive, so the wealthier should pay a higher percentage of their income in the form of taxes. But these sin taxes, such that we're talking about, are certainly the exact opposite of this.
And then, you mentioned how under Prohibition people still drank, but it was they drank in speakeasies and obtained illegal alcohol. There are problems with taxes as well, especially when you raise taxes for these cigarettes to very high levels. There are problems with smuggling, right?
Yeah, so you see the exact same with prohibited taxation. You see the exact same problems that we saw under Prohibition itself. And so with cigarettes right now, we do see that if you look at New York City, New York City taxes alone. So we have the $1 federal tax, you have the $4.50 state tax, and then a $1.50 for the state tax. So you're looking at $6.86 of taxes alone before you even pay for the cigarette. Well, I could travel to the next state over and avoid a lot of those taxes if I live in New York City, if I still wanted to consume that particular product. And folks are doing this. But then there's also this potential for, if I'm entrepreneurial and I'm willing to operate in this underground economy, well, I could actually buy in bulk, legally buy in bulk in Virginia, where the taxes are 30 cents per pack. So you have the 30-cent state tax and the federal tax of $1, $1.31 total taxes. So it's a $5.35 or $5.55 difference in tax rate between Virginia and New York City. That's a pretty big incentive for me to buy in bulk and then cart them illegally up to New York City and sell them illegally to consumers up there, who are individuals just trying to save a buck, right? The consumers are. And so there's a lot of this more organized smuggling that's happening as well. So there's cross-border shopping, some of which is legal, some of it is, depending on the scale of it, some of it is not. But the organized smuggling from state to state or from outside the country into the country, this is very much an illegal activity. And we do see, based on our estimates, that in 2019, the state of New York, about 52% of all consumption of cigarettes within the state originated from outside of that state. That's a huge, over half the cigarette consumed in the state being from outside the state. And this is all just people trying to evade or avoid tax.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also issues if once you have tax evasion going on, then that becomes a legal issue, and those have consequences as well. Because I mean, I think in 2015, Eric Garner came to national attention. He was killed by New York City police officers when he was unarmed, but he was involved in this cigarette trade, right?
He was. So the pack of cigarettes that he was selling, what we call loose, and so that's single sticks. A single cigarette at a time. And so if you're in New York City and you ran out of cigarettes, you'd rather not have to buy a pack of cigarettes at $14 a pack when if I can just get through the day, go to, say, New Jersey, buy in bulk there and bring it home. And so you just need maybe a couple of sticks to get you through the rest of the day. And so they'll buy individual sticks from people. This is illegal. It's not legal for this to happen. But that's really what Eric Garner was doing. That pack of cigarettes that he was selling came from Virginia, the same type of thing that I was talking about earlier. And again, this is an illegal activity. And since it's illegal, the police basically are put in a position where I have to confront that. And so that led to the confrontation and ultimately led to his death. And so it's unfortunate. I think that most police officers, they would say, oh, there's better things for us to spend our time on, but this is an illegal activity. We're being put in a situation where we have to engage in this confrontation. And unfortunately, some individuals such as Eric Garner have lost their life as a result.
And then there's another element with taxation, and that's some elements of substitution across maybe different types of alcohol or different types of cigarettes. And that's another thing you explore in your research here. So tell us how, and that can be particularly relevant because people might end up harming themselves as much even though they, say, smoke less or drink less alcohol by volume. Tell us how this might work with the taxes.
Yes, this is called the Ouch and Allen effect. And so, or the quality substitution idea. And so I'll just give a simple example first and just use candy bars, right? So let's just look at two quality levels of candy bar. Say a Hershey's bar, it's a decent chocolate, right? And then a Godiva chocolate bar, a little higher quality chocolate. Let's just say the prices are $1 and $2. So Godiva costs 2 Hershey's bars. Okay? If we place, because we want to discourage people from consuming unhealthy candy, maybe we place a tax on candy bars and just assume the full price is passed on to consumers. And so it's $1 tax. So now instead of $1 and $2, it's now $2 and $3. Notice that there's still a $1 absolute difference between the two, but the percentage difference is now closed. It's no longer 100% difference, it's only a 50% difference. And so Godiva, instead of being 100% more, it's only 50% more. Fewer people may consume, in this case, candy bars, but of those who continue to consume, there'll be a substitution toward the higher quality. Mm-hmm. In cigarette, the higher quality is flavored, but the flavor doesn't come from nicotine. The nicotine is being unchanged in this regard. The more flavorful cigarettes are coming from the higher tar. And so they tend up substituting toward cigarettes that have more tar in them. But notice it's the tar that does the damage to the lung. And so they're maybe consuming on average, consuming slightly fewer cigarettes, but cigarettes that have higher tar. And behaviorally, since you're consuming fewer cigarettes, you tend to take deeper toke because your body naturally is trying to get back to that nicotine level. So you take deeper tokes on every cigarette. And so deeper tokes on cigarettes with higher tar, it's possible the health consequences as a result of these taxes is actually to make people worse off than they were before. That's not probably going to be the norm for everybody, but certainly for some it is.
Another area we've seen more recently a lot of paternalism is with obesity and steps to try to keep people from overeating. We've seen sugary drink taxes and a lot of work with like school lunch menus. From an economic standpoint, what are the problems that are trying to address here? They're like, I think, information and incentive problems that allegedly might be leading people to be overeat or be obese when they don't realize that it might be in their interest to not be.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issue that the argument here is that we're not very informed about what the long-term consequences of our current dietary decisions are. And I think there's some degree, some logical argument here that's probably valid. But at the same time, I don't think these taxes and these bans are really going to address it very well. Because if you look at in a lot of schools, they have banned sugary sodas and like other types of canned drink. And what's happened is the students have substituted toward chocolate milk. Chocolate milk has more fat and actually has a lot of sugar in it. And so we've seen that the obesity effect from the switch over to chocolate milk has been worse than if they just would have drank the sugary drinks to begin with. And so it's really difficult to try to manipulate individuals into making decisions in their diet that are in line with whoever the planners really are in that particular case.
One final thing I'd like to touch on a little bit here is that once you open up for politicians to have this power to restrict people's behavior, they might not do it only for our good. They might do it at the behest of certain producers. And so tell us a little bit about rent seeking, how that is relevant here.
Yeah, so if I was one of the producers of cigarettes that are high end, I actually might favor a tax on cigarettes because it could increase my market share, right? And so I may lobby the government to impose a tax on my own product that applies to all of my competitors as well, if it actually ends up leading to a better bottom line for me in particular. And so some of the motivation for the taxes, not trying to say that this necessarily is the case, but it could be that it's actually leading to, the support is actually from those in the industry because it benefits some of those politically connected groups. And so we do see that rent seeking can play certainly a large role in determining what products are actually taxed and how they're taxed and at what rate.
So we just got a few moments left here. Is there any last, in summary, conclusion points or takeaway for us here on this?
Yeah, so ultimately these selective taxes and these types of nudges, or like I say shoves, are really dangerous. I think it's very difficult to actually force people to behave in a certain way. And so if I were to try to summarize some of the policy prescriptions that we would suggest that we consider outside of this is certainly reduce the selective taxes. I don't think we're going to be able to get to a point where we eliminate them, but certainly reduce the use of them and the rate at which we use them. And try to use more broad-based taxes, so taxes on income generally. The sales tax isn't really all that. It's a broader-based tax than the selective taxes, but most states actually exempt a ton of things anyway in the sales tax. So making the sales tax truly broad-based would actually also be a step in the right direction. But also, if we're trying to encourage people to change their behavior in better ways, the behavioral literature has indicated that carrots are better than sticks. And so rather than penalizing through taxes the behavior of individual, it may be better to have more modest taxes on some items to raise the revenue, to provide some carrots for better decisions. So if we want people to stop smoking cigarettes, maybe we should help subsidize patches so that people are more likely to actually follow through.
Well, thanks very much for coming on and talk about this important issue. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next time for another EconVersations.
This has been EconVersations, a joint production of Troy Trojan Vision and the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy at Troy University.